What's going on? Jake here with Uncommon EDC. Today we're taking a look at another knife in the Protech lineup. This is the Protech Sprint, which is an out-the-side automatic that is California compliant. What that means for the rest of the country is at 5 inches in overall length. This is going to make a great secondary knife or fifth pocket carry, but probably won't be your primary knife unless you work in like an office job where you're really not doing any heavy duty cutting and you just need something for quick utility cuts. This may be a viable option, but I think for most people they'd probably prefer something a little bit larger as their primary knife. Now, the reason it is so small at that 5 inches in overall length is here in California, in order to be compliant with the automatic knife laws, you can only carry automatics with a blade length of under 2 inches. And so this one has a 1.95 inch blade. That does make this one of the more affordable knives in the Protech lineup, at least as far as base models go. You can get this one at around $150, maybe a couple dollars cheaper if you take advantage of a sale or coupon codes or something like that, but usually in that ballpark. And the base model has aluminum handles and a CPM S35VN Spearpoint style blade. And so great way to just check out a Protech also. Again, even if you're not in California, you want to see what their automatics are all about. This still has that Protech kick, super snappy, and kicks just as hard as the bigger models. They also have great customer service, so if anything ever does go wrong, they'll take care of you. And most likely you'll talk to one of only a couple people. It's a small family-owned business and has had the same employees for years, which always is great when you do need to deal with them. And so really great model. At that 5 inches, it's also a great direct competitor to the Runt 5, which is their other California compliant model and probably the more popular of the two, if we're being honest. And we'll compare those in size a little bit later. They're very different besides the length, which is very similar. Different blade shapes. We get this great Spearpoint style blade on the Sprint. Different handle shape. This one is basically a scaled down version of the Newport, which I guess we can take a look at in a moment here as well next to it. And then the big difference between them is going to be in the thickness of them. This one is a lot more slim. The Sprint is a lot more slim. The Runt is going to be a little bit on the chunkier side, which makes a difference in both carryability, the ergos of these knives. So we'll definitely get into that as well. So speaking of, we have a 3.05 inch handle rounding out that 5 inches in length, and that gives you a pretty solid 3-finger grip on here, relatively comfortable, no hot spots whatsoever. I think for me personally, I do prefer the ergos in hand on the Runt 5 over the Sprint, but did talk to a buddy who owns both as well, and he preferred the Sprint by a decent margin, and so I only slightly edge the Runt, and I think that's because it fills out the hand just a little bit better, but it's really going to come down to preference. If you ever have the opportunity to handle both, I would definitely do that before making a decision, because you may prefer one over the other as well. I know Protech travels to most of the major shows. They're pretty much constantly at different shows, so you do have an opportunity to check them out in a lot of areas of the US at least. And so decent solid ergos, I'd say. Like I said, I prefer the Runt, but these aren't bad by any means, especially for the types of cutting you're going to be doing with both of these knives, where they're smaller, kind of secondary stuff, mostly just utility cuts, quick cuts, not in hand for long periods of time. Very, very comfortable overall. This is right hand tip up carry with that deep carry pocket clip. Their pocket clips are just fine. I probably will swap this out for a Lynch clip eventually, which is very similar stylistically. I just will swap it out for one that kind of matches the handle a little bit better, but overall super solid. Mentioned the action on here, kicks just like any of the larger models in that Protech lineup, super satisfying and super snappy. That button is recessed into the handle, and so makes it a little bit more difficult to accidentally deploy this knife. Not impossible to do, but much more difficult since it's recessed into that handle. And that's a big deal because this one does not have a safety on it. A lot of their models don't have safeties, which I actually prefer. I never actually use the safeties, and I haven't had issues with them deploying in my pocket, but I know some people do prefer them. This one definitely does not have that, but overall really great action on here. Those aluminum handles also keep it ultra lightweight at about 1.65 ounces for this model, and so overall really great looking. And so I did mention the Runt. Let's look at them side by side. So this is a special 25th anniversary Nexus edition. I recently did a video, also picked up at that same friends and family shop tour that they did. But you can see they're pretty much identical in terms of the length. The main difference is really going to come down to handle preference. I like the shape of this one a little bit better in terms of the smaller handles, which is ironic because when they scale up, the Sprint scales to the Newport. I prefer the Newport Ergos. And so you can see this one is significantly thicker, and so it does fill out the handle a little bit better. The trade-off there is going to be in pocket, especially fifth pockets, which tend to be a little bit on the tighter side. The Runt 5 is a little bit bulky. It's definitely going to imprint more on those tighter pockets, a little bit harder to slide in and out of the pocket, and it just carries a little bit bulkier than the Sprint. So the trade-off is that you get a little bit better in-hand ergos, at least in my opinion, and then a little bit better carry ergos on the Sprint. And so did want to show that also side by side with the Newport, which is one of my favorite models in the Protech lineup. Another kind of recent addition. I have nearly every knife they've made. I think the exceptions are the CQ7, the Godfather, and the Invictus, which is a pretty new model, but have all of the rest of the models, and this is one of my favorites. You can see the exact same blade shape, exact same handle shape, everything's just been scaled up a little bit, and the ergos on this are nearly perfect. It's still ultra lightweight, keeps a lot of the characteristics I like about the Sprint, and just does them a little bit better. So for me, if I were to kind of go back in the lineup, I would probably pick up the Newport. This one isn't California compliant. I do live in California, but it doesn't seem to be super widely enforced. I've never had issues with it, but I do prefer the Newport over the Sprint. And if I'm choosing between the California compliant models, I would probably choose the Runt, but you really can't go wrong either way. They both have, you know, clear benefits and clear cons to them, and maybe you prefer one of the blade shapes over the other, one of the handle shapes over the other. So like I said, it is definitely worthwhile to handle both if you ever get the opportunity. But overall, super cool knife. I was able to get it at a super discount, which is why I finally pulled the trigger on this one. I've had my eye on it for a while, but being able to get it at even lower than that already low price really made that decision super easy to pick this one up. Let me know what you think of it down in the comments below though. As usual, if you enjoyed the video, consider liking, commenting, subscribing, joining the channel as a member, or even checking out some of my other videos. All help the channel out a ton. And as always, hope you have a great one. Take care.